Hello, this is the Private Investigator Experience podcast. I'm your host, Phil Little. I share the life and cases of a PI, and I do deep dive investigations into current events that can affect our lives where we live. This is a little different. I'm doing a time sensitive open letter to President Trump about the dangers of believing the promises of the radical Islamic haters of Israel and of the United States also. The decisions that America makes now about how we deal with Iran, Hamas, Syria, and the rest of Iran's proxies will bring blessings or curses on us. Let me first say that this is not about all the Arab people. I've had an office in Riyadh and worked for years in Saudi Arabia and across the Gulf. I have great friends there who have embraced me as part of their family, knowing my Christian background and my close ties to Israel. We talk about God, Christianity, and Israel, and one official told me that years ago when I first went there, oh, we have a back door and we talk to Israel. Will you help me by liking, sharing, and subscribing and getting this message out to as many as possible? The decisions that are made now are so critical to our future and of the world. And I say, Mr. President Trump, as a businessman, I'm in awe of your amazing accomplishments in your first 100 days, and particularly this last week of what you've accomplished in the Middle East. It's amazing. I support you in your efforts to make life better for all Americans, not only those who voted for you. But my concern is that with this fast-paced, critical background issues can be missed. And I am referring to Iran and the Middle East with Israel and Hamas, Palestine, two-state solution, kind of all wrapped together. Iranian nuke, and we have the same players involved in all these things. Mr. President, I'm using my biblical worldview to look at Israel and all the issues. I base my support for Israel on Genesis 12:3, where God says, "Those who bless Israel, I will bless, and those who curse Israel, I will curse." And this all comes to me from my background in the Middle East. I got involved in Israel and southern Lebanon in the late 70s. Was very involved on the ground there for years. I learned about terrorism, about the issues that were going on at that time, which was with the PLO, and now it's gone into a much broader, deeper world event with Iran backing of Hezbollah and Hamas. So I've got a little bit of knowledge and ground work involved in understanding the people and what the issues are. Now, some people will say the Bible, God's word, it's just a book written by a bunch of guys that got together and wrote it. I happen to disagree with that. In Second Timothy 3:16, it says every word in the Bible is inspired by God. That's from Genesis to Revelations. I take that as fact because of where it's coming from. I'm going to keep this as brief as possible, but we'll share some facts. First, let's deal with Iran. Mr. President, you're a deal maker. No doubt you're one of the best. But these people you're dealing with have had thousands of years to develop their position, and they're the best at lying and leading the best negotiators into believing them. These are beyond professional. And anybody that you've ever dealt with in the business area. Why will Iran never give up their nuclear program? Now they might say they will, like they did with Obama or others over the years. They've signed all kinds of agreements, and they have a lot of enriched uranium. So Iran's uranium enrichment program has a focal point of international concern for decades, with negotiations, sanctions, threats, and all that. It failed to halt their progress. As of March 2025, Iran possesses over 100 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. It's close to weapons grade, and they've accelerated their production despite global pressure. Now, experts right today, this week, are saying that within a few weeks they could have 6 or 7 bombs when they could push this to the 90% that's needed. So this is getting down to the wire here, something that's gone on for years. Some argue that Iran's persistence is deeply tied to its religious identity, specifically the Twelver Shiism and the eschatology belief in the 12th Imam, the Mahdi. Well, what is this 12 Shiism and the 12th Imam? The 12 Shiism, the state religion of Iran, since uh, actually since the dynasty back in 1501, is the largest branch of Shia Islam. It comprises about 90%, the numbers say, of Shia Muslims worldwide. It centers on the belief in divinely ordained imam and successors to the Prophet Muhammad. Now let's remember, Muhammad didn't come onto the scene until about the 5th century. And they were to be the guides of the Muslim community with infallibility. They were no one could contest them. The 12th Imam was Muhammad al-Mahdi, and he's believed to have entered a calculation, or shall we say a deep sleep, around 874 CE. Now he's going to return as the Mahdi to restore justice and establish Islam globally with Sharia law as the world ruler. They believe if they start a war to destroy Islam, then the 12th Imam will return, come out of the cave, help them defeat Israel, and establish their world domination. This is their motive for a nuclear bomb. They believe this, just like those of other religions that believe in their religion, and they would die for it. And this theological vision has been invoked by Iranian leaders. And back during the time of Ahmadinejad, president 2005 to 2013, he emphasized that over and over. They were preparing for their Mahdi's return, and of course that meant there had to be a destruction, a war starting with Israel. Some hardline critics and members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard view the necessity that destruction of Israel will lead for the Mahdi's reappearance. They frame it as a religious imperative. This perspective suggests that Iran's nuclear ambitions, including uranium enrichment, could be driven by a desire to assert power in the region, eliminating perceived enemies like Israel, and fulfill prophetic conditions. Now, this is a little side note here. Iran has enough oil and produces enough oil to provide all of their needs in electricity. Why then would they want a nuclear program, a non-nuclear or non-military one, which they say for other uses? Normally, countries, when they develop nuclear power, it's for creating power, but they don't need that. So that's something to be alert to, and it shows that they have other motives. Well, religion as a tool here. Uranium enrichment, which began in the 1950s under the U.S. supported Atoms for Peace program. When you get to digging, you find out all these kind of programs the U.S. Was involved in, is involved in, like the USAID that Elon uncovered with all of that corruption and doing things to get in all kinds of trouble out around the world. And it is framed by Iran as a sovereign right for their peaceful energy programs. Okay, what are they going to do with all this peaceful energy production? Yet, Iran's stockpile of the 60% enriched uranium goes far beyond what's needed for civilian reactors or any reason that they would have it. Well, what are some strategic imperatives and regional power? Iran's enrichment program is also driven by strategic goals. Moreover, Iran's regional ambitions supporting proxies like Hezbollah and countering Sunni rivals like Saudi Arabia. That requires projecting strength. which a robust nuclear program would do. Limited domestic uranium sources force Iran to rely on imports. Yet, in its enrichment capacity, for it exceeds civilian needs, suggesting a dual use strategy. Two of their facilities, the Natanz, now I don't deal with this language very well, and Fordo facilities, they have thousands of centrifuges. They can produce weapon grade uranium in a few weeks if Iran chooses. Though U.S. intelligence and other intelligence agencies say um, they don't see any active work on that right now. But you know how long the intelligence agencies have been on so many issues over the last year. So I wouldn't necessarily take that as gospel. The Iranians are very, very good at hiding what they're doing away from everyone's eyes. And then what are the limits of religious determinism? Khomeini's vision of Islamic governments was pragmatic, adapting Shia's tradition to modern politics. Similarly, Iran's enrichment program reflects a calculated blend of ideology and politics. While Mahdiism provides a narrative for hardliners, the program's persistence is rooted in regime survival, regional dominance, and defiance of Western sanctions. And Mr. President, these have failed to halt its progress. Nothing has slowed them down. Conclusion then. Iran's refusal to abandon uranium enrichment is so involved in the 12th Imam theory and destroying all Jews, no matter where Israel or wherever they're at. It's a religion, and they are willing to do anything. Why? To become martyrs, to keep the ability to have the bomb. I realize, Mr. President, that we should do everything we can to avoid war. But beware, so many before you have tried to stop Iran's nuclear program and failed. I spent the last 50 years on the ground in the Middle East and surrounding areas. I've gotten a pretty good understanding of the mindset. Please consider carefully all of the decisions about this situation. Now, in conclusion, why do I state that a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine will never work? If it is forced, we will be kicking the can down the road, and the next attack will make the October 7th attack look like child's play. The challenge of peace is in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The introduction to that. The Israeli-Palestine conflict, one of the most enduring disputes in modern history, while territorial and political issues dominate contemporary discussions. The origins of the entity between Jews and certain Islamic groups trace back to the ancient religious narratives, particularly the story of Abraham's two sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Now, if someone's listening or watching and don't know who Abraham is, he's one of the, well, he's the father of the Jewish race and one of the most important characters or figures in the Jewish religion and culture. Let's look then at these ideological barriers to peace, focusing on the historical and religious roots of the conflict and the stated goals of groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, their backers in Iran, which makes the negotiations profoundly difficult and, in my view, impossible. The Abrahamic origins, Isaac and Ishmael. Now, this is not the Abraham Accords that President Trump started and is working on. The results of the Jewish-Islamic conflict and accounts of Abraham, a patriarch revered in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. According to the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 16, verse 21, Abraham had two sons, Ishmael, born to Hagar, an Egyptian servant, and Isaac, born to Sarah, his wife. Excuse me. God's covenant, promising land and descendants, was established through Isaac, Genesis 17, 19 to 21, designating him as the heir through Jewish people would descend. Ishmael was blessed with a blessing, but not included in this covenant, leading to his and Hagar's expulsion after Isaac's birth. This narrative underscores the Jewish claim for the land of Israel as a divine promise. The story of Isaac and Ishmael, while ancient, is involved by some radical Islamic groups to frame the modern conflict as a continuation of a divinely ordained struggle. For example, certain extremist ideologies portray Jews as the descendants of Isaac, but as usurpers of a land rightfully belonging to Ishmael's heirs. But the fact is that God gave the land to Abraham and the Jewish people forever through Isaac. That's the word of God. Excuse me. And I happen to believe that. The narrative of paternal, amplified over the millennium thus serves as a symbolic foundation for the enmity, particularly in radical interpretations that reject coexistence. The historical family and the ideological roots. The modern conflict emerged in the late 19th and early 20th centuries with competing Jewish and Arab nationalist movements in the historical, was called historical Palestine, but it was really Israel. It was never as a state or an entity named Palestine, and that goes back, that's another story to search that out. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, following the UN partition plan, was a triumph for Jewish self-determination. But the Arab Palestinian would not accept the land they were given. They refused it, even though it would have been a two-state solution. Every time and since then, they've been offered the land, it was refused. They want the land that Israel was given and also the whole territory and eradicate the Jews. And that still continues to this day. Beyond territorial disputes, a deeper ideology, enmity persists, particularly among groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, which draws on both religious narratives and modern political grievances. Hamas, in its 1988 charter, explicitly calls for the destruction of Israel, framing its struggle in a religious duty rooted in a specific interpretation of Islamic teaching, including the Abrahamic narrative. Though in its 27th charter softens some of their voice, it still rejects Israel's right to exist. Hezbollah, like by Iran, similarly views Israel as an illegitimate entity, with its leader Nasrallah stating in 2000 that Israel is an illegal usurp of entity. Iran's leadership, since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, has consistently advocated for Israel's elimination, with figures like Khomeini and his successors framing it as a religious and political imperative, often invoking the Abrahamic struggle as a justification. These politics are not just talk, but are embedded in the group's foundational documents and public statements for anyone to see and check it out. Iran's support for proxy groups across the region, Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and others, demonstrates a commitment to undermining Israel through both ideological and military means. The stance, rooted in part in the ancient narrative of Isaac and Ishmael, fundamentally challenges the possibilities of peace as it rejects the basic premise of Israel's existence as a sovereign nation. This is very much terrorists when you're fighting terrorists. Their only desire is to kill you. So you can't negotiate with them. They aren't going to give anything. It is similarly this way. If Iran gets a nuclear bomb, they will use it on Israel or attempt to. The challenge of negotiating then with this ideological absolutism. Peace negotiations require mutual recognition and a willingness to compromise. As I mentioned, they're not willing to compromise. However, when one party denies the other's right to exist, the foundation for dialogue collapses. Israel, as a recognized state with a democratic government, they've engaged in peace talks with other Arab countries, Egypt, 1979, Jordan, 1994. These peace treaties are lasting. They're still active and enforced today. Yet groups like Hamas and Hezbollah, driven by ideological absolutism, partly inspired by the Abrahamic narrative, they reject such framework. Their stated goal is not coexistence, but eradication, as evidenced by Hamas's refusal to renounce its charter, which calls for Israel's destruction, even during ceasefire talks. The absolution is compounded by Iran's regional strategy. By funding and arming proxy groups, Iran sustains a cycle of violence that undermines moderate voices within the Palestinian broader Arab world. This question then arises: how can peace be achieved with entities whose stated aim is your destruction? Trust, a cornerstone of any peace process, is eroded with rocket attacks, suicide bombings, inflammatory talk. The October 7th, 2023 attack by Hamas, which killed over 1,200 Israelis and took hundreds hostage, underscores the practical implications of this ideology, further hardening Israel's skepticism towards negotiations. Well, the broader context: can peace overcome ideology? The radical side of Islam has shown over the years that they aren't interested in changing their position that Israel must be destroyed. The only reason they will still have meetings with the West to talk about peace is to buy time. They've not had a heart change. However, such skills require leadership willing to prioritize coexistence over dogma, a quality currently absent among the leadership of Hamas and Hezbollah. The Palestinians, the pursuit of peace is complicated by internal divisions. The Palestinian Authority has shown a willingness to negotiate, but its legitimacy is undermined by corruption and competition with Hamas. And they're also still paying money to the families of martyrs or those who have killed Jewish people. And they won't stop doing that. Ordinary Palestinians, some of whom desire peace and economic stability, are often caught between these factions with little agency to shape their future. And if they do speak out, Hamas has been brutally killing them as examples. Conclusion then: the Israeli Palestinian conflict is not merely a territorial dispute, but a clash of ideologies with roots in the ancient narrative of Isaac and Ishmael. The radical teachings and statements emanating from groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and their Iranian backers, which draws on this narrative to reject Israel's existence, reveal a worldview that sees its destruction as non-negotiable. This stance, enforced by decades of enmity and ongoing violence, makes peace impossible. For peace to become viable, a fundamental shift in this talk and policy and action is needed, one that acknowledges the right of both people to live in security and dignity. I would like to end with this. And I'd like to say that I see hope for change, but my wishful thinking is overshadowed by my investigative sense and the knowledge I've had over the last 50 years, and that the facts speak for themselves. Mr. President, this is the most important agenda on the table right now, with all the other things that are going on around the world. And the decisions that are made will dictate our future and the world's. Think and act wisely. I pray that God will guide you in all your critical things and decisions that you have to do. I would welcome your comments or thoughts. Please leave them on any of the platforms or email me at pi777 at gmail.com. Thank you again for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Until next time, may God bless you, your family, and may God bless America.